Hey, fifth grade, I'm going to finish reading Jeremy Thatcher for you. Here's chapter 11, Confessions. Ah, Midsummer Night, said Mr. Thatcher. Wonderful date, filled with magic. 23rd of June, if I remember correctly. That's not the middle of summer, cried Jeremy. It's the beginning. Just another little trick of the English language, said Dr. Thatcher with a shrug. Jeremy felt sick. He had thought Tiamat would still be with him for another couple of months. Midsummer Night wasn't nearly so far away. Anything wrong? Asked Dr. Thatcher. Jeremy shook his head and left the room. For some reason, June 23rd sounded vaguely familiar. He went to check the calendar in the kitchen and found that the date was circled. He had circled it himself and read with exclamation points, because it was the last day of school for the year, and it was only 2 weeks away. 2 weeks, thought Jeremy in despair. Can I stand to let Tiamat go when the time comes? He really didn't know. The dragon was a part of him now, and he was used to her constant presence in his mind, the never-absent play of colors at the back of his head that spoke to him of her moods. He loved these colors. They were starting to show up in his art, making it richer and stronger than it had ever been before. Yet Tiamat was already too big to stay in his room. In fact, he was planning to move her to one of the small barns that very night. Jeremy waited until the house was quiet. Walking on tiptoe, he led Tiamat down the stairs, through the cat hisses as they crossed the kitchen. None of them came near. Jeremy had to open the door for Tiamat. The cat door she had been able to slip through in such a short time ago was already too small for her. Now, for heaven's sakes, don't sit here and try to breathe flame, Jeremy said as he led Tiamat into the barn. You'll burn the whole place down. He accompanied the speech with an image of a flame-breathing Tiamat sitting on the barn and fire, and a sense of how upset he would be if that happened. Don't worry, she replied with a whirl of white and gold. After Tiamat was settled in one of the abandoned stalls, Jeremy returned to his room and worried. He worried so much the next day in school, somewhat to his own surprise. He found himself telling Mary Lou both that Tiamat had grown enormously large and that she was supposed to leave. What are you going to do? Asked Mary Lou. What can I do? She can't stay here. Mary Lou put her hand on his arm. Do you want me to go with you when you take her? She asked quietly. Jeremy surprised himself again by considering the offer. I don't think so, he said at last. Saying goodbye to her is something I'm going to have to do on my own. There must be some way I can help you. Jeremy shrugged. You can help feed her if you want. Mary Lou seemed delighted. I'll bring over a gallon of milk tomorrow morning. In fact, Mary Lou rode her bike over with a gallon of milk every day that week. On Friday morning, Jeremy began to wonder if the milk trick was still working. That was because Fat Pete's owner came to the Thatcher house to ask if anyone had seen his cat. Jeremy swallowed hard. Though Fat Pete often wandered away, he always came back within a day or two. Now he had been gone for 3 days, the exact amount of time Tiamat had been in the barn. Had he saved the cranky cat from Freddie only to have Tiamat down it for a midnight snack? Excusing himself, he raced down to the barn. Tiamat was waiting, her long neck stretched out beyond the edge of the stall. Breakfast? She asked, sending the image of her bucket of milk along with her question feeling. Later, said Jeremy irritably. Then he sent her an image of Fat Pete along with his own question feelings. The feeling she sent back could be best translated as yum. Jeremy turned pale. Did that mean that she had eaten the cat or that she would like to? He was still trying to figure out how to image the question when Mary Lou walked in with a gallon of milk. Good grief, she said, staring at Tiamat in awe. She's getting bigger by the day. Jeremy nodded in dismay. Judging by the marks he had been making on the stall wall, she was at least a foot longer than yesterday. Most of that was tail, but still, her size was getting to be a matter of real concern. Much as he loved her, Tiamat at 10 feet was not as charming as Tiamat at 10 inches. Do you think this will be enough? Asked Mary Lou, as she poured the milk into Tiamat's plastic bucket. I sure hope so, said Jeremy. Then he told her about Fat Pete. You don't know that Tiamat did it, said Mary Lou defensively. True, said Jeremy, but I don't know that she didn't either. He shivered. What if she goes on a binge some night and eats all my father's patience? Maybe I better go back and get some more milk, said Mary Lou. She looked embarrassed. Only I'm out of money. Jeremy dug in his jeans. The way things are going, I'm going to have to find a job just to feed her, he said ruefully, handing Mary Lou the last of his allowance. They left for school with no clear answer to the question of Fat Pete. When they passed the Bot Hill house, Specimen moped out to join them. He was the only boy in the class who would still walk with Jeremy, now that Jeremy was walking to and from school with Mary Lou. I wish whoever gave Kravitz that hot foot would confess, said Specimen. Jeremy felt himself blush. Wasn't it worth missing the contest to see Mr. Kravitz get that hot foot? He asked hopefully. Specimen shrugged. No one asked if I was willing to give up the contest for the sake of a laugh. Jeremy's stomach grew tight. It wasn't fair for Spess to be punished for something that Tiamat had done. But the only way he could change that would be to tell Mr. Kravitz that he was the one who had given him the hot foot. In a way, he wished that he had. Jeremy thought about it all morning. At noon, he went to Mr. Siegel and said, "May I go see Mr. Kravitz for a few minutes?" Mr. Siegel raised an eyebrow, then shrugged. "If you want to," he said. Jeremy was relieved that he didn't ask why, but that was one of the things he liked about Mr. Siegel. Even though he made a lot of suggestions, he never pried into your personal life. Jeremy's hands began to tremble as he walked to the art room. "Are you all right?" Tiamat's question whispered through his brain in the mist of blue and yellow. Yes, he thought fiercely. She returned an image of his shaking hands along with her question feeling. I have something to do, thought Jeremy, something difficult. He tried to think of a picture to explain, but he couldn't. Shall I come help you? No. Tiamat broke the connection, but not before sending a message of puzzled dismay. Great, thought Jeremy. If there's anything left of me after I'm with Mr. Kravitz, I get to deal with a dragon and a snit. How do I get myself into these situations? When Jeremy entered the art room, he found Mr. Kravitz sitting at one of the long tables, drawing. The teacher didn't notice him right away, so Jeremy stood and watched the man work. Finally, Mr. Kravitz looked up. Thatcher, he said, in such a neutral way that Jeremy couldn't tell if it was a greeting, a statement, or a question. Even so, he could feel his stomach getting still tighter. Well, what is it? Asked Mr. Kravitz. Jeremy swallowed hard. I'm the one who gave you that hot foot. Nice try, said Thatcher, said Mr. Kravitz. His voice had a note of contempt. He returned to his drawing. Nice try, asked Jeremy, uncertain what that meant. Mr. Kravitz put down his pencil. You didn't give me that hot foot, and we both know it. You were too far away. Who are you protecting? That little weasel Freddie? What did he do? Threaten to hit you if you didn't take the blame? Jeremy blinked in confusion. He had confessed, and the confession had been rejected. Now what was he supposed to do? Explain that it was actually his dragon that had done the deed? His throat hurt. His stomach had a knot of emotion. Years of frustration seethed within him. Then, before he realized what he was doing, he said, Mr. Kravitz, why do you hate me? Mr. Kravitz looked at him in astonishment. Jeremy blinked at his own boldness. Frightened, he took a step back. As he did, he noticed Mr. Kravitz's hand began to twitch. Suddenly, the art teacher seemed to notice it too. He looked at his hand, put down the pencil, and then looked back at Jeremy, who saw something tremble in the man's eyes, a kind of anger, but a sadness too. When Mr. Kravitz finally spoke, his voice was little more than a whisper. Do you really believe that I hate you? He asked. Jeremy hesitated. Probably he should just say no and let it go, but he had come too far now to drop the matter. He put the truth as he felt it in the open. He had to stand by it. Summoning all his courage, he looked at Mr. Kravitz and nodded. The big man turned away for a moment. When he turned back, his face was twisted as if he were in pain. I think you are the most talented student I have ever taught, he said slowly. Talented but undisciplined. You need them both, Thatcher. Talent and discipline. One without the other is useless. Jeremy stared at him in astonishment. Mr. Kravitz stared back. Uncomfortably, Jeremy lowered his eyes to the picture Mr. Kravitz had been working on. A stiff drawing of some trees beside a pond. The drawing was accurate, but still and lifeless. As he watched, Mr. Kravitz's big fingers twitched. The drawing crumpled beneath them. Suddenly, it all became clear to Jeremy. Mr. Kravitz didn't hate him. The problem was that the man was jealous. Jealous because Jeremy was a better artist than he was. The idea was astonishing. It couldn't be true. Or could it? Maybe what Mr. Kravitz resented, hated even, was that he, Jeremy, was talented but didn't show any discipline. He returned his gaze to the teacher's face, searching it for information. The big man looked away from him. Who really gave me that hot foot? He asked after a moment. I was responsible, said Jeremy truthfully. Mr. Kravitz sighed. Go back to your room, he said. Your class is back in the contest. Everyone except you.